Easy now, folks. So I've got myself some of this plastic mesh used for crocheting and things like that. One thing I'll say from the start, I haven't been able to find out what grade of plastic it is. Every plastic has got a grade and it tells you if it's food safe and all the rest. So like I say, I haven't been able to discover that. But I have spoken to people that use this in their aquariums, and so far it has been totally fine. So I'm going to give it a go because there's loads of things you can do with this. I'm going to show you a few of them. So it's just like a, it is what it says it is. It's a plastic mesh, isn't it? But we are going to manipulate it into things that we might want to use in our tanks. Look into it a bit more yourself before you're happy to use it in your aquarium. But like I say, I do know people that have used it, so I'm confident to proceed. And I get mine from a lovely little place called Love and Stitches. It's a lovely wee name for a shop, isn't it? The staff in there are always super kind and interested in what you're doing. So you can get this gear from shops like that or online vendors, I'm sure. I thought you might be able to see it a bit better if I throw a black background underneath it. But this gear is very, very versatile. It can easily bend and twist, and you can cut it into shape pretty easily. Now, I always like to shave off the wee, I don't know what you call them, like the wee spokes at the edge. I like to cut along the lines so there's no rough edges that my fish or anything else can scrape against. You can see how easy it is to cut through though, not using any specialist tools. This was a pair of scissors that I found in the kitchen drawer, or not the kitchen drawer if Mrs. DKF is watching. Definitely not your best scissors. Anyway, the first thing we're going to have a go at building is a better hammock. You can see this is going to twist around lovely for that purpose. If you're not sure what a better hammock is, so betters like to rest near the surface, and if you've got a kind of taller tank without plants at the top of the tank, it can be difficult for them to do this. So a better hammock is a nice solution. Basically, we're going to twist it into a cylinder, and then we're going to use cable ties to keep it together. Now you can use white cable ties. I did have white cable ties, but they went missing. You could also use thread if you're prepared to do that. You'd need to make a few passes in order to hold it tight, but as long as it stays in shape, that's what we're looking for, really. I had to snip the plastic between two of the wee squares there just to make it, well, allow the cable tie to pass through. You may not need to do that yourself depending on the thickness of the cable tie, but get the idea, hey? So that's us made a tube. In fact, I think we might need another one in the middle here. Let's do that. There we go. We fixed the middle now, so it is a kind of equal shaped tube. Now we can use the cable ties to hold it in place, maybe jam it in the lid or whatever if you want. Alternatively, you can snip the cable ties off. And again, we want to try and cut the cable tie as close to the join as possible, just so there's no lengths of plastic sticking out that your fish can graze against. Now these do tend to float, so you can just leave them near the surface for your better to enjoy, as long as you haven't got a load of current and flow pushing it about the place. A nicer idea though, if you're wanting to hold it in place, is cut a wee hole. Now, if there's any young people watching or clumsy people, get somebody who's a bit more sensible to help you with this. But cut yourself a wee hole that's big enough for the end of a suction cup to fit through. Probably need to snip off the wee piece that's in the way there. This is why you need somebody kind of handy to help you with this. Stick the end of the suction cup in place, and then you're ready to stick it on the side of your aquarium or the back or wherever you want to use it for that matter. My boy doesn't really need one of these. The tank isn't too deep, and there's plenty of plants that he can rest near the surface, but He's interested straight away. Look, what's this new thing in my crib? I'm not saying it's the most natural looking thing in the world. You can always hide it up at the back of your tank right enough. I'm just saying that if your better does need a resting place, then this is a nice option, nice and cheap option. It will need cleaned every now and then. If your better is going to be resting on it, then you want to make sure it's a healthy place for him to take a chill. Him or her, I guess, if it's female, betters you keep. But you get the idea. This is the first time I made a better hammock, I'll be honest with you, and he did use it. However, every time I approached the tank to try and film it, he thought he was getting fed and came straight out, so I didn't get any footage. But like I say, you get the idea, hey? Something I've always used this plastic mesh for is my grindleworm cultures. And I've done a video on grindleworm cultures. I'm not going to go too much into that. But one of the things you do need is a feeding platform for them. The worms find it easy to get up between it to access the food. And it's a nice way of transferring them into the water. You just pick up one of the feeding platforms, wave it about in the water, and hundreds of worms will come off into the water column for your fish to eat. And it's a nice way of making a new culture. So you just lift off one of those wee platforms, put it into the new culture with a bit of food, and it doesn't take long for them to start making their way to the new food. If you're somebody that likes customizing filters, then it's a nice way to separate your media. I used this filter for a long time just as a polisher on a tank, and I did find the filter foam floss at the front kind of started bending and twisting and almost at danger of falling into the tank, but with this filter guard in place, kind of prevented that from happening. You can use it as a temporary tank divider. Maybe you've got a bit of a boisterous fish that needs a wee time out, or a safe haven for fry. Give them wee space to go where the adults can't penetrate to keep them safe for a while. Well, this plastic mesh is going to do that job for you on a short term. Cut it to shape, push it in a gravel and a couple of suction cups to hold it in place, and we are jamming. The last idea I've got is to make a nice moss background, and this is something that's going to take a lot of time to look good. But what we're going to do is chop the moss up into nice small sections, and then we're going to use super glue. Any super glue with cyanoacrylate as an active ingredient. See that at the top there, that's aquarium safe. And we're going to use this to attach our moss to our plastic mesh. It is far better to use the gel type because it's going to stay in place and it won't run. So if I was trying to use the usual glue on this, it would just sink through the holes and drop on our table or whatever. But the gel type is going to stay in place. And then we kind of just dab wee bits of moss on here and there until it holds. Now, in all honesty, I think these clumps that I'm using are way too big. I think some of it is going to die off. If you can see the kind of brown section at the bottom there, that's kind of, well, that's seen better days, right? We don't want that. Ideally, we want a nice, healthy, green-looking stuff. I'm doing this as a bit of a kind of experiment to see how it takes off, but I've got another way of doing this as well. I've also just realised, better than using a Stanley blade or a craft knife, aquarium scissors are just perfect for being delicate and making those precise incisions into our plastic mesh. But what we're going to do is make little holes and then just push a few strands of Java moss through and then pull it through halfway. Now this is going to take a while. This is a bit laborious if I'm honest with you, right? But it should yield better results. Moss does better at first when it's not really compact. When it's compact, it tends to rot, and that's why you see those brown patches. What we're going to do here is put as many strands as we possibly can with the moss that we've got into the mesh and keep trimming it. In fact, we'll let it settle down for a few days, and then as soon as it gets longer than we want, we're going to trim it. And as we trim it, it tends to spread out, right? The idea is as we trim and as it spreads, it's going to fill this whole entire sheet. Right, this is what I've ended up with. It's not pretty, I'll give you that. Show you the other side. So it's kind of coming through both sides, and as we trim it, it should spread and cover this whole sheet eventually. We can use all the bits that fell away to fill extra wee holes as we go, and you will get loads, loads of it fall away. Moss isn't easy to deal with, really. At least in the beginning stages anyway. But once we've got our sheet filled with as much moss as we can possibly manage, we're going to gently place it at the back of our aquarium. If you've got a powerful filter, I would advise turning that off while you do this, because anything that comes loose is going to float about and move about in the water. But if the filter's off, it's just going to rise to the top and we can grab it out and use it for something else. Doesn't look too spectacular just now, does it? But like I said, as we trim it and as it spreads, eventually that should cover the whole sheet, and we've got ourselves a beautiful moss background. It will take some time, but one thing this hobby teaches us is patience, isn't it? So look, I'm not saying I've covered every use for this plastic mesh in our hobby, but certainly the ones that I tend to use. If you've got any other ideas about what we can use it for, put it in the comments below. And if you've got any thoughts about the uses that I've put it to, put that down there as well. We'll help each other out, eh? But for me, I mean, it's pretty cheap. The big sheet cost me just over £2, so I think it's relatively inexpensive and fun to use. So I'm sticking it in the Cheap Stuff We Need series, and I'm out. Later, 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 later.